everyone, and welcome to this live episode of To the Moon, Allison, where just everything could happen. But what we're normally talking about is science fiction, fantasy, speculative fiction, and romance. I'm your host, Allison Martine Hubbard. Works of speculative fiction are my cup of tea, but today it's a cup of chai in honor of this wonderful series that I'm going to botch the name, even though I've been listening to the audio. So I'm trying to copy the way your fabulous narrator said it, the Muggersar Trials. Is that pretty close, Aamna?
Yeah, that was pretty good.
Okay, and now I'm going to try to not botch your name. So since we weren't able to get things worked beforehand, Aamna Qureshi or Qureshi?
Qureshi.
Qureshi, author of, and this is the first, look how beautiful this is, The Lady or the Lion. And this is a duology, and I would love for you, Aamna, to tell us a little bit about this and what inspired you to write this series. And is it just the two books? Am I going to get a third book, or am I going to have to just let the end sit with me for the rest of my days?
Yeah, it is just the two books. So the ending at the there is the ending.
Okay.
But The Lady or the Lion is a young adult historical fantasy set in a Pakistan-inspired world about a spoiled princess and her forbidden romance with an enemy ambassador. And while that's going on, there's like other politics going on at core and like an illness spreading through the villages. So there's a lot of going on.
There is so much going on, and I am so glad. Just about always, if I have an author who is releasing a subsequent book, I do try to read the earlier books if I can. I don't always have time, and I looked at yours and I thought, okay, these are clearly related books. I probably should read both. I am so glad I did, because I wouldn't have known anything, all the backstory, when I started The Man or the Monster if I hadn't read The Lady or the Lion. And where you leave on this, I am so glad that I was actually listening to it, even though I had got the physical copy. So pretty much as soon as I was done with one, I was downloading the next because I was dying.
Yeah, it ends on a pretty big...
So Aamna, can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write these? And I know you say they're Pakistani-inspired fantasy, but tell me what that means, because I will be honest, I love speculative fiction and fantasy, and when you had it titled The Lady or the Lion or The Man or the Monster, I thought people were going to be transforming into creatures. Guys, that doesn't happen.
Yeah, no, it is a fantasy because it's sort of set in a made-up world, but other than that, there's no like magic or transformations really. But I was actually inspired by the short story, The Lady or the Tiger by Frank R. Stockton, that I actually read in high school. And it tells the story about this princess and her lover and how she has to send him either into the arms of another, to the door of the lady, or to his death, to the door of the tiger. I changed the title because I like alliterations.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
And I also was wondering, like, so in this fictional world, I'm not entirely sure geographically which animal would have been easier to procure, a tiger or a lion. I mean, depending on how far west we go, we're probably more likely to find lions than tigers. But honestly, nobody wants to encounter either of them, to be frank. Yeah. Unless maybe it's a baby when you pet it, but no, otherwise it's not a safe bet if you go with the big cat.
And to answer your question about what I mean by a Pakistan-inspired world, I mean that the characters, like you can just tell from their names, they're sort of like Pakistani names. And there's also some Urdu in the book, and sort of the way they dress and the food they eat and just the culture of the world that they live in is inspired by my own culture. I'm a Pakistani American. My parents immigrated here from Pakistan. So
you are currently in New York, is that correct?
Yeah. Yes,
I picked this mug out in honor of you. So there's chai inside a New York mug.
Thank you.
There we go.
Yeah, I don't actually live in the city. Whenever people hear New York, they think of New York City. I live in the suburbs, about like an hour and a half east.
Well, I have good friends in New York, and none of them live in this city, like super close to it. So I'm aware, but I have the same issue because I'm in Southern California, and people are like, "So you live in Los Angeles?" And I said, "Thank God, no, I don't. I'm down in Orange County. I don't have to deal with quite as much traffic, and there's no big buildings around, other than maybe occasionally a hospital. People kind of all conglomerate them, and it's like, no, you can think that, but that's not quite right." But yeah, I love the Pakistani inspired culture in this book and in the subsequent book, because they really should be read. Get them both, guys. You gotta read them both, because I'm really tired of the idea that when people say fantasy, they automatically think of a medieval European setting and probably some fairies, maybe some elves, maybe some orcs, because somehow J.R.R. Tolkien became the only person who's allowed to write fantasy, and we all have to follow that kind of real similar template, and I love how it expands the horizons and incorporates your own culture and the things that you love, rather than just like, okay, well, here we go, there's a unicorn, maybe a dragon, and
Yeah,
that you open this up. So how did you get some of the names? Because I loved the, okay, so Durkane is our princess, but how do you say the role that she is? She's like a Shahzadi. She's like the princess, but we don't actually call her princess all the time. What language is that derived from? Is that Urdu?
Yes, so Shahzadi literally means princess in Urdu, and funnily enough, I think it's sort of something that people use as a term of affection. So growing
Oh.
up, my grandparents like always called me Shahzadi, or like my parents. So yeah, that was sort of sweet to add in there.
Okay, you mentioned your grandparents. The second book, I believe, is dedicated to your grandparents.
Yes.
Have they read these?
No, they're not readers, and I don't think know enough English to be able to read them. I think my grandparents tried the first book. I think they got through like one chapter or something, but no, they didn't read them.
Well, and the reason I ask, and I don't want to do spoiling, but there's a lot of family politics in here, and the grandparents are really the people who have raised Durkane. And so she's the one, she looks to her daddy. And for the longest time, because I was listening to it, I'm like, oh, this is her, she's calling her like daddy, like, oh, it's my dad. And then I realized, no, that's her grandmother, but it's not spelled the same. So this is kind of one of my pitfalls when I listen to books. I have to then go look to see how things are spelled and make sure then that when I type them out, I'm even slightly close, because a lot of times I'm not even in the right vowel half the time. But the grandparents are key, and they aren't always super positive. Sometimes they have some questionable choices. So I was wondering if the dedication to your parents or your grandparents was like, sorry for what I wrote.
Yeah, no, I think in my head I always knew like my first book I wanted to dedicate to my parents, and my second book I wanted to dedicate to my grandparents. It just ended up happening that way, that the story sort of is, I mean, when you read it, you find out what happens with the grandparents. But I will say that a lot of the grandparents sort of loving and doting moments in both of the books, those are definitely inspired by my grandparents. Sort of the more sinister moments I made up, but the loving moments are definitely from real life.
I love how you clarify. You're like, by the way, first off, I'm guessing they probably don't rule a kingdom, because his parents are literally, or the grandparents are literally running this entire kingdom. And I was really fascinated by all the court intrigue and the different politics. And there were times when I really wanted to be able to draw out where these things were, or do like an org chart of like, okay, so the Wali is up here, and then we have these people over here. Okay, so this one's in charge. The Bajda isn't, who's higher, Wali or Bajda? Because I wanted to know, okay, who answers to who? And then you've got all these ambassadors coming in, and I wanted to like assign who was going where. But ultimately, I was able to follow it even by listening, which it means you explained it really well, because I can get very easily lost. So kudos to you on that. I really appreciated that. It was clear most of the time, and just occasionally I'm like, wait a second, are these people enemies? Wait a second. Okay, so there's some people who are maybe in trouble because, oh, this whole thing starts with something where a summit has happened, and just about everybody at the summit gets killed off. So the question is, who was behind that? So you start with this wonderful political intrigue, and I just loved that. What was the inspiration for kind of taking it beyond just romance and making it bigger than that?
Yeah, so I've always loved fantasy romance novels, sort of these stories that have a lot going on, and then romance is like a really strong element in them, because I feel like it's sort of in those high stakes and high tension situations that romance can really blossom, ironically enough. So I wanted the story at its core to be a romance, but I wanted there to be more to the story, and especially with my main character Durkane, I wanted her to have sort of a life and a story and development beyond just her romance. So you really see her grow as a princess and, you know, as a leader. And that was something that was really important to me.
Well, and I love the role you give women in this, because especially I feel like in fantasy realms, especially when it comes to politics, a lot of times the women are relegated to, well, we might be able to marry you off for something. But other than that, they don't really get a whole lot in the way of individual autonomy or power. And that doesn't mean there aren't constraints on those things, and that some people aren't necessarily telling them that they aren't allowed to follow their heart because that's not politically expedient. And you should go marry that nice boy over there because his father is very important. And that still happens in real life too. But the idea that these women also are women of power and that some of them are the ones who lead the kingdoms, and that it's not, oh, well, we're still waiting for a male heir to show up, that Durkane is going to be the heir regardless of the fact that she is female, but then it does matter who she marries because whoever she's with is also going to be probably elevated to power. So it gets complicated.
Yeah.
Well, and you had ambassadors of both female and male, rather than just like, oh, here come all these men, including one very. I was already dreamcasting what Esfandiar looks like in my head, but that's probably because just too many movies where I'm seeing handsome men, and then I want to see Esfandiar touching her coconut oil inspired hair and going. When is this a movie? Because I want to watch this.
Oh, that's really funny you say that, because actually my dad, he's not a big reader either. So he's like, oh, when it becomes like a movie, then I'll watch it.
You're like, Dad, I would love for that to happen, but could you read it in the meantime?
I know. And I told him, I was like, if you find me a director and
like, get on that.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would make a great movie, mostly because of the characters. I mean, the setting is gorgeous, but I can see all these characters, and you have such a great character arc for Durkane. And as you started describing her as a spoiled princess, it's like, yes, that's where she starts, but she grows so much, and so much of her heartache along the way is this conflict she has between her duties and her duties to her people and to her family, and then doing what feels right to her and who she loves. And I think most of us, we just don't have those kind of decisions on our plate anymore, because it's just like, I just marry who I want to marry, or don't if I don't feel like it.
No, she definitely goes through a lot. I'll like look back and like I'll read it or whatever, and I'm like, oh, like I really, gave her a tough time. Like goes through so many different things. But I think that was something I was also just inspired by, like my friends and my family members around me, because of course, even though they're not going through stakes as high as they're
I hope not.
Yeah. I feel like everyone is, juggling so many things, whether it's like family problems or like, relationship problems or, school or work or whatever it is. But I'm so inspired by the people around me, because I feel like they all handle it with so much grace. So even though Durkane does go through a lot, I think it is realistic for her to be able to handle all of that. I mean, she definitely struggles along the way, like everyone does, but in the end, I think she's just trying her best and, doing the most that she can.
Well, and I also love how when she's struggling with some of her different feelings, one of my very favorite things that you include in this book is the different types of love. And some people are like, oh yes, I know about the love languages, because there was a book about that recently. And other people have heard of like the 4 loves, because there was, I think it was a C.S. Lewis book about the different kinds of love, like agape versus philos versus eros. But those aren't the loves that you described. You described these amazing different loves that basically, this is probably going to oversimplify, but go from like a passing infatuation to the deeper love to, well, this is one brought on by witchcraft. And I loved all of those. And I'm like, which ones have I gone through? And which ones do I currently feel? Where did you find those? Is that something that you were brought up learning? Was that part of your culture, or are those things you made up?
So I love the Urdu language. I'm fluent in Urdu, and I speak it with my parents and my grandparents, and when I visit Pakistan as well. And those 3 types of love that I mentioned, those are like actual Urdu words. So I think when I was writing it, I was sort of thinking, which word would I use to describe Durkane's love? And I think sort of just in the act of translating them, I was realizing how different each of them were and how they sort of describe this journey that she's going on. So I wanted to show her sort of in each different phase of love, sort of beginning with sort of like that, passing sort of, not sort of deep rooted love, but, that infatuation or that, being drawn to the other person. And then it sort of deepens to a sort of love that can be a bit maddening and obsessive and sort of drive you crazy. And then, the true real love that she ends with, that, it's this deep rooted love that makes her a better person and sort of encompasses her entire being. So a lot of that, just came from translating. And I love translating Urdu to English and sort of finding the nuances between the 2 languages. So that was something I had a lot of fun with.
Well, I loved it. And I loved how you used it as part of the plot, but also explaining and incorporating some of the Urdu. And I feel like you used just enough to give me the false sense that now I speak Urdu and I'm answering people with, now does shukri mean thank you?
Yeah, shukriya means thank you.
See, because you never translated it, but I figured it out, and now I'm trying to answer it and incorporate it. So next time I go someplace where I might encounter someone speaking Urdu, I'm probably going to use it, and they're going to look at me like, "You have no idea what you're doing. Just go back
No,
to the English."
you'll
Because
be a quick learner.
and the thing is, I was fluent in Spanish for about 10 minutes 30 years ago, and now I've lost most of it. So now I just know enough in any other language to just cause trouble. Really, I can't do much else other than that. But I love how you incorporate in this because it gives it that feel of like, these are words that are heart words rather than like, okay, well, we can talk about anything when it comes to, okay, this is clearly, it's a horse. We don't need to give it a special name for a horse, although the horse is very special. And I love the relationship that Durkane has with her horse, and even that Esfandiar has with the horse. It's not an inappropriate relationship, guys. It's just they care about the horses quite a bit. But then that you use these special words for things that are either ceremonial or, oh, the food. You made me so hungry. I'm a little mad, but that's okay. But the number of times where one of the characters that I just love, Gulalai, where she's like, when are we having more food? And is there going to be a feast?
Yeah.
She is a woman after my own heart. Where is the food?
Yeah, she was really fun to write. And I think a lot of times those scenes with the food, it was either because I was drinking my cup of chai or I was, wanting a snack or something like that. So I was like, what would I sort of conjure up for my right now? So it was just like sort of an extension of what I was going through when I was writing it.
Well, that's fair. And I use a lot of food in my own writing, and people either love it or they get mad at me because they were like fasting or on a diet, and they're like, I broke my fast because you mentioned a grilled cheese sandwich and I had to have one. Like, it's a grilled cheese sandwich. It shouldn't have been that important, but they're like, yeah, but I hadn't had one in a week. So.
Immediate craving for it when you read about it.
Exactly. You read it and the characters are drooling over it, and then you can't help but do it too. But can you tell me more about Gulalai, and is there a Gulalai in your life? And for people who are like, what the heck is Gulalai? Gulalai is one of the other ambassadors who is then becoming one of the friends of Durkane and kind of like her right-hand woman. And that relationship is something where, since they come from slightly different backgrounds, they're not in the same place, isn't like an instant connection per se. Do you have a Gulalai in your life?
Yeah, I think my best friend, actually, we've known each other since we were born because our moms are really good friends.
Oh.
But we're actually really different. And my mom always says this. She's like, I don't know how you guys are best friends because you guys are so different. But we just, click and connect and can be there for each other in the way that I think Gulalai and Durkane also support one another. And I'm really lucky to be blessed with so many, strong friendships with other women that I think it was really easy to write that into my books.
And I love seeing friendships with women, because one of the things that I loved about your book is, while there are strong female characters in here, even ones who aren't always having goals that line up, they're never catty or competitive in that way with each other. And when there are fights, it isn't even because they're competing so much as somebody's let someone else down, or they thought they should have made a different choice, or some choices made their life infinitely harder.
Yeah.
But I loved how you handled that, because none of them were ever reduced to a caricature or a stereotype. These were all really well-developed women, including, I have to come to the cousins. So Durkane's cousins, who a couple times I wanted to knock their heads together. I'll tell you, not to Durkane, but to each other. Please tell me you don't have cousins like this.
No, luckily I don't have sort of cousins. But I think the thing is with the cousins, even they thought they were doing what was best for her. And that was what I wanted to explore in my books too. Sort of everyone in their own right thinks that they're doing what's best, and, thinks that they're looking out for each other. And, no one is really the villain in their own story. So that was something that I was trying to get across, even with, the grandparents or her cousins, or even Durkane herself. Sometimes she does questionable things. But no one really imagines themselves to be the villain. Everyone sort of thinks that whatever they're doing is justifiable. So I really wanted to have that complexity in my novel, where there was no sort of black and white, oh, this person's right, this person's wrong. I wanted people to be more layered than that, because I think in real life, everyone is incredibly layered. No one ever thinks that they're doing anything wrong. But that's sort of where you have to take a step back and, really think about what you're doing and think, is this really what's best, or is there a way that I can sort of handle this in a nicer way?
Well, and I love that you have Durkane work through those things too, including figuring out other people's motives. And sometimes she's faced with decisions where loyalties might take her one way, but then she's looking at their motives as well. So it isn't just you're outright telling the reader, well, this person made a good choice or this person made a questionable choice. But Durkane really wrestles with all these things. She doesn't, I mean, there are some times when she acts impulsively, and sometimes she acts impulsively for good reasons. Like even near the beginning of the first book, you mentioned the sickness that's spreading. She makes some choices because she doesn't see action happening to help her people fast enough. So she might do some things that are not necessarily sanctioned that might come back to be a problem later. But she does it from a place of, I want to help. And she always then is looking at other people in that way too, of, well, what are their motives? And are they doing it for themselves? Are they doing it for power? Are they doing it to hurt someone else? Are they doing it for vengeance? And I think between all the characters you have, somebody's probably doing one of all of those at any given time.
Yeah.
Is there even some that I'm like there, and I don't want spoilers, so I'll ask you afterwards. There's at least one character that I never felt got their reckoning for some of their actions, but I won't say who. But I will say that I'm like, she never came back and said, "What were you doing?" and how could you? But I get it. Sometimes there are bigger fish to fry and bigger things happening that it's like, I will deal with you and your shenanigans
later.
But not right now. But not right now. Yeah. But I do like that you have these different stories. So while Durkane is our main character, there are certain sections and chapters where we get this other person's story and we get their backstory that leads to why they are where they are or why they made the choice that they made. What inspired you to use that as a technique in your writing?
I think that was actually really fun for me to do, just because I love when I'm writing a story, I sort of think of every character's backstory and why they're acting that the way that they do and sort of what leads them to their decisions. So it was fun for me to have chapters from those characters' perspectives and sort of give the backstory that I, as the author already knew, but I thought it was like important for the readers to also know so that they could understand those characters and why they made those decisions and sort of help the readers get more of a bigger picture rather than just be confined to their Durkane's perspective.
Well, and sometimes those had some of the biggest twists where you're like, oh, I did not see that coming. And oh, I did not. Because so much of this book, I was telling my husband a little bit, I said, so much of this book is Durkane finding out that what she was told may not actually have happened. And I love that because it's not that she's an unreliable narrator, but she's lived an unreliable life with these people around her, everybody telling her versions that suit them or that they think are true. And then you find out later, no, that's not necessarily what happened. Or no, we told you that because we wanted to not get into the details. So we just kind of glazed over with this nice shiny shellac. And you've lived with these things and it formed who you were. And maybe not all those things are true. And I think a lot of us have those in our own lives. I hope none of that happened to you, that you didn't have like backstories where like, rug just ranked out of under your feet and have no idea where that came from. For your writing process, then, are you more of a plotter or a pantser? Like, did you sit down? Can I find a huge stack of notes with everybody's backstories and everything?
So I don't have a huge stack of notes like that, but I do sort of plan things out and plot them. I don't sort of like. I think a blank page sort of stresses me out.
Yeah.
And I need to like have some notes where like I know where I'm going. So usually I'll start with just like a really quick, beginning, middle, end. Then I'll like expand that further. But I usually stay on the same document. So like my outline will just turn into my draft and then I'll edit on that same document. Just because I like seeing like the progress rather than like looking back at stuff that's like maybe old or outdated or whatever. But yeah, I definitely have to plan things out because I need to know where I'm going in order to like properly write, hints at things that will happen later or like flashbacks or foreshadowing, things like that.
Well, and those of us like me who are pantsers, what we end up having to do is to go back and put those in when we're like, oh, or sometimes we do luck out where something that didn't seem significant at the time leads to what a big reveal may be later. And you're like, look how smart I didn't even know I was being, because you're able to kind of then go, oh, see, this actually does lead here. But it's not by any huge orchestrated plot. Sometimes it is just dumb luck where you go, oh, that's the perfect thing. I know a couple days ago, I'm like, I have the perfect, not twist, but a perfect reveal. and I can't decide if it's genius or stupid. And my friends are like, this is what your beta readers are for, because they'll tell you which one it is. Because sometimes you're like, I'm too close to it to tell. Did you have some beta readers who were cheering you on through this?
I actually didn't. So when I was writing The Lady of the Line, I like wasn't part of like the writing community at all. Like I wasn't on Twitter. Like I didn't even know sort of that the community existed. It was really just me writing it and, you know, revising it. I have one really good friend from high school who I always send all of my work to. So she sort of gave me general feedback, but nothing like super specific. Yeah, it was mostly just myself working through it and then, you know, sending it to agents, working on like feedback that I got from agents, stuff like that.
And then when you wrote these books, did you envision them as 2 books or one big book? Or how did you end up deciding, like, this is where we're going to draw the line? Because I know that where you drew the line is why I had to download the next book. And I mean, like, literally, I was finished and already going, get the next book on here because I need to know right now.
Yeah. So I always knew I wanted to leave the first book the way that I did, with, you know, the trial and her decision and sort of that cliffhanger. Then I had like ideas for where the story could go from there. But I wasn't sure if it would be like a trilogy or a duology. But I think when I started writing the sequel, the duology is what made the most sense for me, especially because it's like the 2 doors. So I was like, I think 2 books wraps it up nicely.
Well, and I think it does too. And the only reason I asked at the beginning is because I would love to read more of your writing, but I know you do have another book coming out, but it's not related to this. Do you want to tell us a little bit about, I want to say it's called A Brown Girl Flees?
Yes. So my next book is titled When a Brown Girl Flees. That will be out in fall 2023 with 2 books. And that's about a hijabi Pakistani American girl who runs away from home basically in order to find herself. And it just follows her journey of, you know, self-healing and dealing with mental illness and, you know, topics like that, like a coming of age type of story. And that's
it's not fantasy and it's more modern set, I'm guessing, if she's set in America.
So that's a contemporary novel. It's set in the real world.
Well, and I love your writing style, so I will go there even if it means that I'm not going to get to live in a kingdom that doesn't exist, because I still want to be with your characters. So I'm going to hop on board wherever you take us. But do you think you're going to revisit not necessarily Margazar specifically, but more Pakistani inspired fantasy again?
I definitely do want to write another fantasy, and I think anytime I would also create another like Pakistan inspired type world. I think fantasy just takes a lot of prep work and research, and writing them, like they're so long, and like they're super involved. So I think it will be probably a while before I get back to fantasy. Right now I'm focusing more on contemporary stories, especially I think because during COVID I wrote like I think more just like lighter, funnier, fun type of stories. And The Lady of the Lion, while it was, I think, challenging and fun in its own way to write, it was definitely, I think, more like taxing, just because, you know, you're going through it with your characters and they're going through so much and you're trying to get a happy ending for them. It doesn't really seem that easy. Whereas with contemporary stories that are lighter and funner, you sort of have more control and, you know, you can give them their happy ending more easily. Yeah.
Okay, and Naz Kosar says, the beginning of the second book was something that I think made us all cry, but I'm glad I read on. Well, I hope nobody just went, well, forget it, I'm done reading.
No, the beginning of the second book, I had a lot of fun writing, even though it's supposed to be very emotional. But yeah, keep reading.
Please don't stop.
Hopefully it gets better. I think it's supposed to be a lot of up and down. I've heard from a lot of readers that the sequel is like a roller coaster and makes you experience like every emotion possible. But I love books that are like that are really immersive and sort of have you on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen. So that was sort of what I was trying to do with these books.
Well, I think you succeeded. I'm just glad that he's glad he read on, and I'm like, well, I should hope that you read on. I don't even know. It's an outline, so Naz, whatever. I shouldn't use he. They think this, so hopefully whoever is reading it wants to read on and doesn't just go. Especially because I won't say more, but there are some things that aren't necessarily spelled out exactly clearly at the beginning. So if someone stops reading too fast, they're like, what? Like, no, keep reading. Just don't stop there. Did you get any pushback about how the first book ended. And I don't mean from readers necessarily, but I don't know if agents or editors, if anybody said, you can't stop here.
No, actually, my editors really loved the way that the first book ended. They found it really compelling, which I was so glad about, because I think that was something that I wouldn't have wanted to change. So yeah, luckily I didn't get any pushback. And I had like such great editors for both books, but especially for The Lady or the Lion, that I feel like just understood what I was trying to get across, and everything that they suggested that I edit made the book stronger. So I had like an incredible experience publishing those books.
Well, that's awesome, because I do know that some people fear that the editors are going to fundamentally change something about their
Yeah.
books instead of really embrace it. And it's really nice when you do get an editor who's like, I see your vision and here's where we're going to polish it to make it shine, not just, well, that seems like a good idea, but how's this one completely different one instead? And you're going, that's not what I wrote and that's not what I wanted to write, but if this is what I have to do. And I know that there are authors who've done that, where they've even changed the genre of the book or added fantasy to it when it wasn't fantasy because they were told to do it. I do want to say, inside your book, so I don't have a physical copy of The Man or the Monster, and I did promise people that I was going to show inside this, because Cat Books did such a beautiful job with this. You can kind of see, there's, my light's a little weird, you can see there's a border on the pages, but then this one,
interior design, they really did like an amazing job.
My eldest daughter has already claimed that she's going to color this in later with colored pencils. And I said, you can't do it before the show, but if you want to go ahead and add this, I mean, look at this. I feel like I could color this and make it one of those calming coloring pages, because it's just gorgeous and intricate. And I'm just imagining this in the palace somewhere, like either as a mosaic or on the floor or in some of the stuff. And there is a map. So I know I joked that I needed a table of contents or some kind of power org chart, but there is a map here so we know where everybody is and where they're going. Oh, and Marie Sutra says it's lovely. And Marie, it absolutely is. So, and the book, it's kind of hard to see sometimes in pictures. You may look at my Instagram where it's a little closer, because on here you probably can't tell, but this isn't a photograph. It's this beautiful, it looks like an acrylic painting. Was this done specifically for this book?
Yeah, so there's this Pakistani painter who I've been like a huge fan of for the longest time, Asrar Faruqi. And when we were getting the cover, when we were thinking about the cover for The Lady or the Lion, I was like, oh, can we commission a painting from him? Because like I love his work, I love his style. And my team was so great. They were like, yeah, like definitely. So I reached out to him, and I like described what I wanted with this castle and, you know, the valley and everything. And he did such an incredible job. I actually have the painting. I don't have it close by to me right now, but it's like this big painting. And it's like so beautiful. And it has like such lovely texture with the paint. Because he has those really thick brush strokes. So yeah. And then I was so happy with what Marianne Apple did with the actual lettering and, you know, that gold sort of border on the cover.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. And I was going to say those brush strokes, I can see them on the book. Now the book is smooth, so I can't. So it's like, I want you to go after the show and go take a picture next to it, like touching it. Probably don't touch it. Don't touch the painting. But I am a terrible painter, but I do like doing it. And I always love the acrylics because how you can layer on the paint and get it really thick. Yeah. You can't do that in watercolor. I can't watercolor at all, so I wouldn't even try. But acrylics have that, and I could see this, and I'm like, this is not something, and I'm not throwing shade on anybody who's enjoying doing some of those AI designs, and so we're doing like AI covers, but for me, nothing's going to replace a very talented work, especially one that's just commissioned specifically for your book. I mean, that's absolutely amazing. So thank your artist for doing this, and I think that's awesome that your publisher was like, yeah, we'll get that.
And he did for the sequel as well.
Oh, did see? I haven't looked carefully at the sequel because I've only looked at it on my phone, which I had to go put in the hallway because I was making too much noise. I can still hear it. I'm glad nobody else can, but it's literally in a pile of laundry that's supposed to go in the washer when I'm done with this, and it's over there still echoing at me. But it's okay. We make it work. But so we might not get to go back to Margazar specifically, but I do hope that whoever does later fantasy covers for you, they are like these. See, that's the back, that's the front, because these are just absolutely gorgeous.
I'm so happy with how the covers came out.
Well, and aspiring authors out there, or those of you who are close to getting book deals, push for a good cover. Because I mean, especially if you know someone who can do it for you, or not do it for you, but you have someone whose art you want to have featured. What a better way to do that? Because I mean, I know that I first found you looking at Twitter, and the covers just caught my eye, and that means just hey, that's when the people, your audience stops and goes, ooh, what's inside? And yes, I thought maybe somebody was going to turn into a lion, and I was wrong. I knew it was fantasy, but to be honest, fantasy covers a really large genre, and I have friends who write fantasy or historical fantasy, and I would say this was historical fantasy, but again, because there's no such place as Marxar. I mean, there could have been. I don't know. My history is so bad. I think even though I was a history minor.
And I think I sort of just made it up because I didn't want to be confined by like a real historical place, and I didn't want to like do a disservice to history. So I think I sort of was like, oh, let me just, make up my own world and my own kingdom and my own sort of power structures and everything like that.
Well, one thing you incorporated, and I thought was very interesting, because I was mentioning this book to a friend, and I said, and in this place that has all this barbarism, I'm like, not my word, the author's word. She's the one who's been using that. I thought it was very interesting because I think the very first line, I'm just going to read it because it's even before the story starts. It says, in the very olden time, there lived a semi-barbaric king. This is not his story. I just loved that, but also embracing the fact that there are things that are happening in this book where a modern audience might look at and go, why would you do that? Or how horrible or how inhumane? But we have practices even till today that are probably not as humane as they should be. And older cultures, it's like, we had Roman Colosseums where people were being thrown to lions, and we had gladiator fights. For a book, we embrace it.
Yeah, that first line is actually from the original short story. And the reason that I included that with sort of my extra line of this is not his story is because in the original short story, even though it's mainly about the princess and, this decision that she has to make about her lover, the short story barely focuses on her. It's mainly about the king and, even the lover. It's really not focused on her at all. So writing my story, I was like, I want to bring the focus back to the princess and, why she would make that decision, what would lead her to make that decision. So yeah, this story really isn't about the king, it's about the princess.
Well, I love that. And I think that's a great way for us to wrap here, because it is the princess's story, including you. It's your princess story. And I love that your grandparents called you Shahzadi as a child. And I think that's just so sweet, even if you may have made her grandparents in this story maybe not as lovely as yours. But since they're not going to read it, they won't know. If it becomes a movie and they translate it into any of the languages they speak, then you might have some explaining to do.
Yeah. I'll deal with that when that happens.
We'll deal with that later. No, it was so lovely having you. I'm so glad you could join us. Thank you, everyone who's watching this on the replay, including the very exciting opening where nothing was working. But that's what happens when you go live and things get a little weird. Thank you so much for people who are tuning in on the replay. If you are watching on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe to the Vox Vomitus YouTube channel, where you can find To the Moon Allison, Vox Vomitus, and Let's Scare Jennifer to Death. And next time, join us in the month of November when we will have Anna Mosikat on, who is a cyberpunk author, and she has her newest book, Cyber Squad Level 3, which just hit audio today, and also her Behind Blue Eyes series to talk about. So until next time, thanks everyone. Bye.
Thank you.